Howdy, and welcome to the Pacific Digital Health webinar series for May. I'm Safia Noor, your host, joining all the way from Kiribati, one of the places that looks like Maldives. If you are not aware of where Kiribati is, please Google it. Because whenever I'm outside, I always feel like I'm in Maldives. Today's webinar series is about cybersecurity in digital health. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank DFAT for sponsoring all the webinar series that we are hosting. Now, while we wait for a few more others to join, thank you everyone who has joined currently. And the next webinar series that we will be hosting in June is about digital education for healthcare workers. This is a recorded session, so please feel free to check out our YouTube page afterwards. Now, what all is it about today? So today, our 8th webinar is focused on cybersecurity in digital health. And we have Lachlan, who will be elaborating on this all the way from Palau. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we will get back to you accordingly at the end of the session. Now, let's take this time and welcome our special guest speaker for today. He is the manager in the strategy and consulting practice at CyberCX, the Pacific's largest pure play cybersecurity company. So as I've already shared, he's joining all the way from Palau, and you can also check that particular country out. I have heard it has one of the amazing diving experiences. If you're there, do check it out. Now, thank you very much for doing this special session for us. Welcome to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Safia, and Ali, to everyone on the call here from sunny Palau. And I can confirm that Palau absolutely has some of the best diving in the world, so would recommend it. There's a new flight from Brisbane in Australia straight to Palau. So for any Australians, that's a flight that's been running since December. So Ali to everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about cybersecurity in healthcare. As Safia mentioned, my name is Lachlan and I'm from CyberCX, the region's largest cybersecurity company, and one that operates similar to BES all across the Pacific. So we've got a lot of content to cover today and we want to have time for questions. So we'll start moving through right now. So what we're going to talk about today, firstly, we're going to be talking about the threats to healthcare. We're going to be talking about how an attack actually unfolds. We'll talk about social engineering, and then we'll discuss a little bit around how we can protect ourselves. So starting off, we're going to be speaking about some attacks that have happened, particularly targeting the healthcare system and particularly targeting the Blue Pacific. So firstly is the 2020 ransomware attack affecting Düsseldorf Hospital in Germany. And so the notable thing about that was there was a ransomware attack that shut down the emergency room at Düsseldorf Hospital. And because of that, the ambulances were directed to other hospitals, including one that was up to an hour away. There was a woman who died, unfortunately, on her way to the hospital because she'd been redirected. And the German prosecutors suggested that had she been able to get to Düsseldorf Hospital, she probably would have survived. And so that was publicly the first time that the death of someone was attributed to a cybersecurity attack. The next one is a bit wider in scope. It was a 2017 attack that included an attack on the National Health Service in the UK. And so that led to, it was only an attack that lasted 2 days, but up to 19,000 outpatient appointments were cancelled. Emergency rooms were running at low capacity, and there was a significant degradation of healthcare capacity across the UK during those 2 days.
Yeah, a lovely day up at the
and so someone could go.
We could go.
But I think this is a great example of the scale of what can happen in just a very short period of time when it comes to cybersecurity attacks against health, especially highly digitized systems like the NHS.
Copy trade.
So recently, had an incident that was a bit closer to home. We had incidents affecting the healthcare systems in both Palau and the Federated States of Micronesia, FSM. So they were earlier this year. Both were ransomware incidents that affected those healthcare systems and really have, especially because there aren't very large healthcare systems in Palau or FSM, even affecting a couple of hospitals or even a few systems, really has an outsized impact on the ability for FSM and Palau to provide healthcare services. So that was really disappointing. You might be asking yourself, well, who's targeting healthcare systems and why? And so there's three major reasons. One is, and the biggest one is, that there's a low appetite for downtime. If you're, as we saw with Dusseldorf Hospital, as we saw with the NHS, even small amounts of time or small numbers of systems when they're affected can have really significant impacts on people's health and well-being. So hospitals and healthcare services tend to have a very low appetite for their systems being offline and for cybersecurity incidents. Secondly, there also tends to be a lower IT spend and a lower cybersecurity spend for healthcare systems compared to organizations of a similar size. That's because every dollar that you spend on cybersecurity or IT is a dollar that you're not spending on your main mission of providing healthcare services. And so they do tend to be larger, more complex organizations that do have relatively lower IT spends and cybersecurity spends, and therefore tend to be a little bit more vulnerable. And the third thing is that these are cyber criminals. These are often organized gangs of cyber criminals that don't tend to have strong moral compasses. I will caveat that by saying during COVID-19, there was a bit of a norm of not targeting healthcare institutions during the pandemic, but that appears to have ended, and there are plenty of organized criminal groups going after healthcare services now. Not only is it, we've talked about Germany, we've talked about the UK, we talked about Palau and FSM, but this isn't just affecting healthcare, it's affecting all across the Pacific. This is just a small snapshot of a couple of different sorts of incidents that have occurred in the last few years. Some of them are attributed to nation states, a lot of them are attributed to cyber criminals, but it's something that is occurring all across the Pacific. If I tried to get all of the incidents on one slide, there'd be no room for the map or anything like that. So it's definitely something that is increasing in frequency, and especially as specific countries become more digitized, there are more systems that are then vulnerable to attack. The question now is, why BES, and by extension, why does kind of digital healthcare providers across the Pacific care about cybersecurity? So there's two main reasons. One is around supply chains. So as the provider of digital services, and this is for any organization that provides digital services, there is the opportunity to be either a vulnerability, a point of vulnerability, or a point of extra security. That's because in what we refer to as supply chain attacks, which is where an attacker will gain access to a third-party system and then use that third party's access to gain access to their intended targets. So that happened in the quite publicly known Medibank incident in 2022. The attacker gained access to an IT service provider and then used that access to gain access to the Medibank systems. And the second reason is that digital health systems tend to hold people's really personal, private data, either your personally identifiable information, often financial details when you're paying for your things, or it'll be your healthcare information, like the sort of services that you've received, and information, like really private information about yourself. So those are the two main things that we're concerned about. Now I'm going to run through how an attack actually happens. I think this is something that's not spoken about enough when it comes to cybersecurity awareness. So the first few slides, are we talking about how an attacker might gain access to your system, what they're going to do, or what they usually intend to do. Then I'll go through I'll take a step back, go through the broader, what we refer to as the cyber kill chain, and then walk through an example, a de-identified example. So first two slides are on how does an attacker usually gain access to a system for an attack. And as with everyone, the easiest way to gain access is just to log in, just to unlock the front door with the key as intended. So what we're talking about here is either stolen or reused credentials. So where an attacker is somehow able to gain access to legitimate logins and then log into your system. So the most common way that this occurs is through, they just purchase them on the dark web. There is a flourishing dark web marketplace or a black market for stolen credentials. So how do they get there in the first place? How do you get your password and your username on the dark web? So generally what tends to happen is you'll log in to, or you'll create an account for website X. You know, you have to buy something or something or whatever, and they force you to set up an account. So you create an account on website X with your email and your password. This just so happens to be the same email and password that you use for your bank or for your internet provider or something else, your Facebook or your social media. What then happens is website X gets hacked, and that data, your email and password combination, is stolen as part of that attack against website X, and then that is posted on the dark web for sale. And so what generally will happen is an attacker will go to the dark web, purchase these combinations of usernames and passwords, what we call credentials, and then they'll go to common websites like Facebook, Instagram, social media, as well as large banks and those sorts of things, and then try and log in. If you've used a username that has, maybe an email address that has your company in it, they'll go to that company and try and log in and that sort of stuff. So that's an easy way for them to get in. One of the recommendations that I'll repeat throughout today is to go to the website haveibeenowned.com. So, and yes, it's a P, not an O for owned. And you can check out, and we'll go into more detail about this later, but you can do this while we're talking here. Go and check out whether your email address or your password has been exposed in any attacks. So Have I Been Owned is a website run by an Australian cybersecurity researcher by the name of Troy Hunt. And what they do is they scrape the dark web for all the credentials that are for sale. And so you can go and find out if your credentials are for sale on the dark web. If they are, if that happens, while we're having this conversation, then definitely go and look at changing your passwords for any of those accounts that are affected. The second way that you've probably heard about them gaining access is through phishing. And so what happens with phishing is you'll receive a illegitimate, usually an email, but it can also be text messages or phone calls or some sort of communication that asks you to do a certain thing. Usually that will be either clicking on a link or inputting some information or providing them with some information. And that will then allow them to, throughout whatever means it is, they'll be able to steal some useful information, whether it's your credit card details or that sort of thing, or whether it's your password, and they'll be able to use that information to then gain further access or steal money from you or something like that. So we'll definitely go into phishing in more detail later in this presentation. What happens once the attacker is in? That's probably two of the really big ones for how they gain access. And then once they're in, it's really up to the attacker, depending on what it is that they intend to do. So a very popular attack is ransomware. That shuts down your systems, and then they demand a ransom, usually in cryptocurrency, in order to give you the decryption code to regain access to those systems. Often that might be partnered with data theft. So like we were talking about before, either health data, personally identifiable information, or maybe even just passwords and credentials. They might do nothing that you notice. It could be espionage. It could be changes to data. So quietly changing, for example, logging in and changing the bank details on a business's invoice, so that instead of paying the money to the legitimate vendor, the money gets paid to the attacker. Or it could be something like defacement to try and make a political point. And so what are broadly the stages of a cyber attack? So this is what we refer to as the cyber kill chain. And for an attacker to be successful, they have to achieve all of these things. So they have to undertake reconnaissance. They need to find out who you are. And that can be really simple. There are search engines online that basically allow you to scan the internet for certain vulnerabilities, or it can be really detailed reconnaissance against large targets and that sort of thing. And then weaponization is where you will create the attack, what it is you're going to do. So often that's malware. deliver the malware, as we were saying before, that's often through logging in or phishing. Exploiting is where they actually use the malware or do what it is they're trying to do inside your system. Install the malware, undertake command and control where they're telling the malware what to do or themselves doing it. And then the last stage is what we refer to as actions on objective, which is either data exfiltration or changing something or doing something like that. So for an attacker to be successful, they actually have to get through all 7 of these stages. And so as a defender, we'll often try and pick some of these things that we try and stop. So for example, trying to stop delivery by making sure that they can't log in. So defending against phishing and defending against reused credentials is a way to stop stage 3 delivery. And so now we'll talk through a bit more of a real world example, because that was all quite hypothetical. So you can see on the left there, that's the public internet, and the right is things that have occurred on the corporate network. So there was an external data breach. This one was with LinkedIn, and so the credentials that people were using to log into their LinkedIn accounts were for sale on the dark web. So someone, a hacker, has purchased those credentials, and then they've gone to a variety of different systems, and they've tried to reuse those credentials to see who at this organization is using the same login details for their LinkedIn as they are for their work email, basically. And so they've gained access. They've gained access to the internal email account, and then they've subsequently, using that legitimate email account, so, let's say they've got into my email account, they've sent out 450 emails to people that I know with a phishing attack. So it's kind of a combination of those two things. So they've compromised someone's email address, and then they've used their trusted email address to send out these phishing links. And that's obviously going to be much more effective than normal, because you're not getting an email from some stranger. You're getting an email from someone that you know, that you trust, that you've been in contact with before. So of the 450 phishing emails that were sent out, 300 victims were affected, and 200 of those victims had their credentials stolen. So those login details were stolen. What then happened is, we were talking about it before with the changing of the data, the attacker was able to log into these systems and then modify invoices at this organization. So modifying the financial details within these invoices. So instead of the money going to the vendor, like it was meant to, the money was now being paid to the attacker's account. And so the attacker was paid around $500,000, which might not sound like the biggest cyber attack in history, given we're talking about, the woman died in Dusseldorf and the incident at the NHS. But for not a lot of work, the attacker has been able to, and again, no technical skill required for this. So the threshold is actually fairly low for this. They've just been able to go on the dark web, purchase these accounts, purchase these account details, send a bunch of emails, and then modify the financial details in the system. Not a highly technical or sophisticated attack, and that's netted them $500,000. So not bad. And so what's happened overall? Overall, we've seen just one password reuse victim from reusing their LinkedIn credentials at their workplace. 300 people were affected by that internal kind of trusted phish. Multiple clients paid those fake invoices, so multiple organizations were affected. $500,000 in victim losses. And this attack occurred over 49 days. And again, not a highly sophisticated attack. I think 49 days is just the amount of time it's taken for victims to pay the invoices. We all know that doesn't happen terribly quickly. So not a highly sophisticated attack, but the kind of attack that we're seeing more often. And so when we're talking about phishing in particular, but lots of these sorts of attacks, doing things that are not in your best interest, we refer to it as social engineering. So we'll talk about that. We'll drill down into that a little bit, because that not only affects you in your business capacity or your government capacity, but also you'll be seeing a lot in your private lives, I expect. So social engineering is kind of the modern phrase, or the cybersecurity phrase, that we use for convincing someone to do something that is not in their interests. And usually, I think in the older term might be a scam or a con job or something like that. If you've ever received an email from someone claiming to be a Nigerian prince or anything like that, then that's an example of social engineering. But today, unfortunately, they're much more sophisticated than that. And so it's not just scammers as well. So social engineering is now kind of almost involved in every cyber attack. The last one that we were talking about, there was that phishing aspect. So that person had to craft an email that sounded legitimate, that would get people to click on it and to not be too suspicious of it. And so it's not just scammers anymore, it's hardened cyber criminals, and as an extension of that, it's even nation state intelligence actors, because they're trying to often accomplish the same outcomes as cyber attackers. And so cyber criminals, as we said with phishing, they're going to be looking for information about you, or financial information about you, or personally identifiable information, or something like login credentials and that sort of thing. So these are not real people. And this is something that's becoming more of an issue when we talk about social engineering. Just this morning, news came out that at Accenture, the chief financial officer, the CFO, had received a call invite and had joined a meeting with purportedly to be the CEO. And someone deep-faked the CEO in real time so that they looked and sounded like the CEO on a call with the CFO, and asked the CFO to transfer a bunch of money. Luckily, Accenture has good systems in place so that the CFO can't just send money unilaterally. They have to go through, rigorous processes. So that was thwarted. But the fact of the matter is that we're now moving into an age where even what you see and hear maybe has to be verified. So at the moment, it's large organizations like Accenture that are being targeted with these advanced and sophisticated social engineering capabilities. But all of these faces on the screen were made for free with very basic online tools. So increasingly, with the increasing availability of generative AI tools, we're going to have to be more and more aware of what social engineering looks like, because it's going to be harder to trust what we see and hear, and we're going to have to identify those risks ourselves. So if you can't trust what you see and hear, we might be in a little bit of trouble. So we have to look at other ways of identifying social engineering attacks. Again, previously, we used to talk about stuff like bad grammar, because often you'd see a significant number of social engineering and scamming attacks coming out of places where English isn't the first language. With generative AI, that's no longer the case, because you can just have generative AI write emails for you and that sort of thing. So let's say you're being contacted on social media. Social media bots are very common, very accessible, very cheap. What do we look for so that we can make sure that we're not going to be victims of social engineering? You want to look for new accounts. You want to look for accounts with very few posts, particularly few original posts. So to get around this, often social media bots and social engineers will just reshare a lot of content to make it look like they've got an account with lots of content, when actually they haven't produced any of that content themselves. Accounts with little or no information about them, accounts with only a very few friends. Again, that's becoming harder to identify because the bots are just friends with each other. So that can make it very difficult to identify. I think one of the biggest and easiest ones is if something doesn't feel right. So if you get a random person adding you with very few mutual friends, and then they just start messaging you out of the blue, that's something to look out for, particularly where they're promising really valuable things. They're promising lots of money, they're promising love, or that sort of thing. And you should be particularly concerned if the conversation very quickly moves to those sorts of topics of work or money or love or anything like that, because these are businesses, these are organizations, so they have an incentive to try and very quickly get you from that initial conversation through to however it is that they're going to get money or whatever it is out of you. And so when we're looking for the threats on social media, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. Have you received a suspicious number of friend requests? The definition of suspicious number changes. I remember there have been periods where I've received, 10 or 20 random bot friend requests a day for weeks at a time. So I think it definitely depends on what the social media companies are doing to prevent this and what the attackers are doing. Have you accepted any of those friend requests? Which I definitely recommend you don't. If you don't know someone offline, then you probably shouldn't be accepting friend requests from them online, or if it's out of the blue random sort of stuff. And if it's stuff like LinkedIn where you can see your views or that sort of thing, you have to see, is there a suspicious amount of activity, whether it's likes or views or whatever it is. And things that you should be doing is updating default privacy settings, so making it as private as possible, limiting the amount of personal information that you share. So one of the things that we often say is you only have to worry about the data that you create. So if you're not posting things that you shouldn't, if you're not, let's say, if you're not taking photos of sensitive documents, then you don't have to worry about the photos of sensitive documents being exposed. So try and find or think of ways to limit the amount of sensitive data that you are creating, because then you've got less that you have to worry about. And again, only accept connections from people that you actually know. So we've talked a bit about all the terrible things that can happen with computers and with the increasing digitization of healthcare, but what can we actually do to protect ourselves? And this a lot of this isn't just for our work stuff, but a lot of this will also apply to our private lives. We're talking about social engineering from both a private perspective, but then also a public perspective, because those two, like the business or the work and the private, increasingly overlap, and one can be used to target the other. And so again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, Troy Hunt's Have I Been Owned? So I recommend going, and hopefully you've done that while we've been talking, but if not, do it again, get your colleagues, get your family to do it. Check out your email address and your password to see if you need to change either of those. And I recommend, again, not only doing it yourself, but getting your colleagues and friends or family to do that. So what happens if you go on there and you've seen that your password has been cracked? So what I would recommend is go change your password. Use different and varied passwords. And the two things I'll talk about here is passphrases and password managers. So obviously we use the term password a lot, and I think that's indicative of what it is that we do. So I could go into a lot of detail about kind of cultural norms and that sort of thing. But right now, if you are a native English speaker, your password is probably a noun followed by two numbers, could be four numbers, large minority has four numbers, and then an exclamation mark. Now that doesn't sound ridiculously specific, but when you're a computer that can test thousands of passwords a second, having that sort of fairly predictable structure makes it really, really easy for these sorts of automated bots to attempt passwords and gain access to your accounts. And so that's why increasingly the recommendation is not to use passwords, but to use passphrases. And so the example that I've given here is, I'm writing this sentence in 2025, exclamation mark, 30 characters, symbols, letters, especially, those spaces in the middle. I think spaces is something that people often forget can be used. And it's very secure, but much, much easier to remember. If, like me, you don't want to remember lots of different passwords, but you would like to be secure, I'd recommend looking into a password manager. So password managers will generate and store passwords for you. And I think the biggest benefit for me is that they also have browser plugins and apps on your phone so that it'll automatically input those passwords for you, which actually is even faster and easier than typing in a password yourself. So have a look at, I think, password managers. passphrases if you don't have access to a password manager, but you still want to have something slightly more secure while still being fairly memorable. And so, what if your account's on the dark web, you don't know about it, you haven't checked have I been owned in a little while? So now we'll talk about multi-factor authentication. I had a friend recently reach out to me. She said that she received 10 emails in 5 minutes with different password verification requests. So saying, here's your multi-factor authentication, click here to confirm. What does that mean? And I told her that means that someone has your correct email and password, and they are logging into your account. And if you didn't have multi-factor authentication in place, they would be in your account right now. And so what I said to her was change that password for that account and then go to any other accounts that share that same password and make sure those passwords are changed and that multi-factor authentication is turned on. Multi-factor authentication can be one of three things. When we're talking about authentication more broadly, it can be something that you know, which is often the password, something that you have, which is almost always your phone or some sort of receiving a text message or an email, or something that you are, which is often a fingerprint or increasingly, face scans and that sort of stuff. So the best sort of stuff, multi-factor authentication uses all three. So if I want to log into a nice secure system, I'll put in my password, which is hopefully stored in a password manager. It's very long and all that sort of stuff. Then my phone will buzz because my, for example, the Microsoft Authenticator app or the Okta app. And then I'll say, yes, this is me, and it will scan my face. So that is something that you know, something that you have, and something that you are. And so I'd recommend going out and trying to turn on multi-factor authentication for as many of your really critical systems as possible. So your banking, your finance apps, your emails, and kind of broader nowadays. So like your Microsoft or your Google or your Apple accounts, and then your social media. So multi-factor authentication will block more than 99% of account takeover attempts. So it is one of the easiest, cheapest, and most effective ways to ensure that your accounts are secure. So it's definitely one of the things that I'd recommend going away and doing after this. And so to summarize, because we've been talking about specifically account security today mostly, because that's the thing that most individuals should be concerned with. We want to check, have I been owned? Make sure that any passwords that are repeated or anything like that have been updated or changed. Get a password manager if you can. Set good passwords. So go and check your critical accounts and make sure that they have good passwords associated with them. And then make sure that you've got multi-factor authentication turned on wherever you can. But again, starting with those critical accounts. Today, we talked a little bit about phishing. We talked about it at the start as a means of access. We talked about it as part of the incident example. And now let's talk about what to look out for. So again, it's harder and harder to pick or decide what a phishing email looks like. And that's because of generative AI and the ability for generative AI to produce really convincing looking emails. So I think what's almost a better situation is to look at yourself and your reaction to the email. So one of the biggest ones for me is a sense of urgency. If the email is giving you a sense of urgency, you have to do this right now, you have to, there's been suspicious, account transactions, you're about to be locked out, you're about to be fined. Anything that produces a sense of urgency is to be suspicious of. And that's because when the attackers want to produce a sense of urgency so that you don't stop and think. And so the only way to combat that is to force yourself to stop and think. And so the biggest one for me is there a sense of urgency associated with this? The second thing is this unexpected? Am I the 1,000th, person to access this website today and therefore they're going to send me a bunch of money? Or is this you've got a job offer that I didn't apply for, or have you won a prize that you don't remember applying for, or that sort of thing. So if it's unexpected, you should definitely be even more suspicious of it. And often, if it's unexpected, it's too good to be true. So it'll either be the carrot or the stick. If it's too good to be true, that's the carrot. They're trying to entice you into doing something really quickly, often with the risk of it being taken away. You know, you've won this prize, but you've only got 5 minutes to reply, or else it's going to the next person. Or it's the stick where, you know, if you don't reply in the next 5 minutes, you're going to have a fine or something like that. So if it's too good to be true, again, stop and think, because it probably is too good to be true. URLs and links. On the next slide, we'll look at kind of the anatomy of a phishing example, but there's always a call to action, what they call it in marketing. So it's click on this link now, log into this thing, you know, respond with this information. There's always a call to action. It's never, and I hope you have a great day. Just letting you know this piece of information. It's always a call to action. It's always asking you to do something. And so it's one, again, stop and think before you click a link, which I just think I just made that up now, and I'm very happy with it. And so what do you do if you're not sure? It's one of the things that the BES recommends is to use the NordVPN link checker. So you can go and put in a link there and see how that comes back. But really, the best part about that is in the time it takes you to go to that website, put in the link and check it, because it's not going to have every single link in there. The time that it's taken you to go to that website and put that in, you've stopped, you've thought, and you can make an assessment about whether or not you think that this is legitimate. So now let's have a look at a bit of an example. So at the top, you can see that it's a fake address, because they've got, on Microsoft.com. But again, really have to be careful with these. There's ways that they can structure them to make them look very real. Again, there's that sense of urgency. Your account is about to be deleted. If you don't act right now, your account's going to be deleted. Very generic information. They're not referring to you by the name. They don't know you. Again, lots of urgency and lots of links. That's what you can see throughout the whole thing. On the right-hand side there, you can see that there's an example of a bad link. So where you hover over a blue link, and it'll actually tell you what the account or what the link goes to, what the domain is. And that's really useful, because if you hover over and it comes up with a really random or unrecognized link, then that's really useful, because you'll be able to say, well, this is a bit suspicious. Wouldn't you expect Microsoft to host whatever this is on, blah, 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 Microsoft.com. So that's important to know about. And again, even the unsubscribe buttons have been used as a means of phishing people. I'll send them lots and lots of really spam kind of emails and have unsubscribe as a malicious link. And so the recommendation that I make nowadays is not to try and unsubscribe through links, but instead, if you want to stop receiving emails, then block them through kind of the block sender capability. And so what do you do? We've talked about how to identify phishing and why it's a bad thing, but we should probably also have a chat about what to do if you do click on a suspicious link. So on the right-hand side, there are some examples of, you can see where they've made phishing login pages or where you've got instagarn.com instead of Instagram, because there's only a few pixels different between the two. These can be really sophisticated. You look at that Amazon sign-in page, and that Amazon sign-in page is for the domain that's at the top. That obviously is a really fake-looking domain, but the page itself looks fantastic. That really looks like the legitimate Amazon login page. So it can be incredibly difficult to notice these sorts of things. And so if you kind of get swindled, what are we going to do about it? So the first thing you need to do, if it's a work device, is contact your IT team. Straight away, your IT team or your security team or whoever it is, let them know straight away. Two is to disconnect from the network. So if you're at a desktop computer, that's usually the blue Ethernet cable that there's a picture of there. If you're on a laptop, that's probably going to be just shutting off your Wi-Fi or whatever. And the reason that we do that, and it's really two simple stages, is disconnect and call for help. Because what we don't want on a work device where you're connected to the larger organizational network is them to get from your individual device further across the network. And so if you're suspicious, disconnect and call for help. If it's a personal account or device, depending on what information you've provided, so if it's, as with this example, if it's Amazon, then go and change the details in your Amazon account, change your password. Make sure you've got multi-factor authentication turned on, and just try and make sure that those accounts are as secure as possible. That's what to do if it's a work device, and that's what to do if it's a personal device. And so, particularly in healthcare, and particularly as a service provider, one of the last things we're going to talk about is how do you securely share data. We're increasingly providing information, spreadsheets and documents and proposals to each other, and sometimes things go wrong. So the best way to share data is through a secure file sharing program such as Bitdefender or Liquid Files or something like that, or creating a folder in a Google Drive or a Dropbox or something like that and giving the recipient access to that folder. That's the best ways to do it. Sending things with links attached or not links attached, but with files attached is something that we generally try and avoid because they've then got that forever. So if you send something with a file attached, they've got that file and there's nothing you can do about it. If you accidentally send a link to like a Google Drive or something, then if you realize you've sent it to the wrong person, you can cancel their access to that folder. So that is a much more secure way to do it. What to do if you've accidentally, so we refer to it as a data spill, when you accidentally send something that you're not meant to, so we call that a data spill. So what do? Firstly, you try and limit the impact. As I said, try and recover the email if they haven't looked at it, or remove access to the folder, or something like that. Try your best to revoke the impact of what's happened. Second is, perhaps the person's really reasonable. This has happened, I know, to people that I know. Ask the recipient to delete the information, just say, hey, sorry, that wasn't meant for you. Do you mind just deleting that? If you've got good relationships with them, I think they'll understand and hopefully do that. Thirdly is to contact your IT team and let them know that something's happened. They'll be able to point you in the right direction. And then what's important is to contact the person that is the data owner within your organization. So if there's going to be someone who has responsibility for that data. So if it's a contract, there's going to be a contract owner. If it's health data, there's probably your IT team or someone like that. Because in the event of a data spill, there may well be regulatory requirements. So I know in Australia, if you accidentally share someone's personal data, if it's above a certain threshold, because of the Privacy Act, you then have to let that person know that their data has been potentially exposed and what you've done about it and that sort of thing. So contact the data owner, contact whoever in your organization is responsible with this sort of stuff, because there may well be further follow-on actions that you need to do, which is why the big call out is don't try and cover it up. Because if you try and cover it up, there may well be significant regulatory issues or something associated with that. And if your company gets fined, then you're going to be in much more trouble than if you just put your hand up and said, sorry. I think for us within the healthcare industry, this is particularly important because we deal with personal data and personal health data all the time. It's particularly important for us to be careful when it comes to sensitive data. I think one of the saddest things that I've seen in my work is during the Medibank incident, the attackers were trying to pressure Medibank to pay the ransom. And so one of the things they did was they went through all the data that they had, and they identified all of the people that had drug and alcohol treatment programs, and people that had terminated pregnancies, and put them into a spreadsheet and released that information to try and pressure Medibank to pay that ransom. So again, the information that we hold is fairly sensitive, and there are bad people out there who are going to do bad things to try and make a buck. So it's very important for us to be aware of securely sharing data, particularly when it comes to health data and person identifiable information. So we've gone through quite a bit of content today. What are you going to do once you hang up this call, grab yourself a cup of tea and get ready to move on with your day? So firstly, when it comes to passwords, for the third time, we're going to check, have I been owned? We're going to talk to our colleagues and family about checking their passwords and their credentials. We're going to make sure that especially for our critical accounts, we're using complex passwords, complex passphrases, and then hopefully setting up a password manager. You can definitely look into password managers for your family. So I, one Christmas, as a bit of a cop-out, bought my whole family like a family plan to password manager, and now I just have all of them using that password manager. But even if you don't have a password manager, Apple and Google Chrome and that sort of stuff are offering kind of almost built-in ones. So in Apple, it's called the Apple Keychain, and Google Chrome and other sort of things have their free options as well. So investigate those. Set up multi-factor authentication on any accounts that you can. Go online. There are lots of, like, just Google set up multi-factor authentication, and there's lots of kind of walkthroughs and that sort of stuff. There are the whole websites dedicated just telling you all the different popular sites for you to turn on MFA. When it comes to phishing attacks, we're going to be aware, we're going to be particularly concerned around how we respond to phishing, or how we respond to emails. So if we're feeling a sense of urgency, if we're feeling surprise or it's unexpected, we're going to be particularly on the lookout for those feelings, and we're going to make sure that we're not giving out information, but if we do, we're going to make sure that we tell people and we contact our IT team and that we disconnect. So in the event of an incident, you disconnect and call for help. And then finally, where possible, might not be possible on work devices, but definitely on your home devices, set up your software and devices to automatically update. I know that before getting into security, I was a sinner in this. I would go hundreds of days without updating any of the systems because I didn't want to see changes, or I was worried about losing stuff or things like that. Set it up to automatically update. It's one of the best things it's one of the easiest things you can do to make sure that your security is up to date, and it prevents vulnerabilities in your systems from being exploitable by attackers. Thank you, Safia. Masulan from Palau, I'll throw back to you, and I think we've got some time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Lachlan, for the detailed information on cybersecurity and digital health. I actually loved it personally. I train users here in Kiribati, and usually users have difficulty in terms of remembering their passwords of the Google account, email account, and then the Manu account as well. And we usually advise them the similar things that you have shared. And it was so good to hear that there are some important factors that we are considering here in Kiribati. So thank you very much for that. And I hope everyone has enjoyed that. We have one question for you in the chat, which is about you sharing your contact. And apart from
Dio, happy to share that with you. Safia, I assume that you've got the contact details for Dio?
Yeah, we do.
Wonderful. So I'll just grab those off you after this.
Sure. And anyone else, if you have any questions, the floor is open.
Oh, we got one. Someone's got their hand up.
Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful. I just have a question about passwords, because I remember back in the day, as you say, it's probably one noun and then a couple of numbers and an exclamation point. But we were told to change our password really regularly. And I just wonder if that's still the case. Like now, if you have a passphrase, do do you still need to change it regularly, or can you let it go for a bit longer?
Thanks for that question. That's actually a really good question, because that advice has changed over time. So it used to be the recommendation was to regularly change your passwords. And the reason for that is that in the event that your password gets exposed or someone gets access to your account, if you're changing it once a month, for example, it means that they're going to lose access to that account because the password's been changed. However, what we saw happening was that people were using shorter and less complex passwords so that they could remember them easier, because they were only remembering them for a month. And what they were doing was iterating on a password. So it was far too predictable. It would be the same noun and the numbers would just go up by like one every month or whatever. And so it actually wasn't creating a lot more security, because they were just so predictable and so easy to predict the next one. So the advice, some organizations still require the passwords to change. If you've got a password manager, it's actually not that big of a hassle, because you can just save it in there and have it automatically done. But increasingly, the advice is to focus on having longer, more secure passphrases rather than frequently changing your passwords. But great question, yeah, because that has been somewhat confusing, because that advice has changed over the last few years.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Definitely guilty of just adding one extra number and then being like, that's
we
good.
we all did. I've done that before as well.
I actually have one more question, please. A lot of our users, they share a computer. And so often then either saving in the one kind of Google account, so all of the passwords are in there. Just wondering if you've got any advice, particularly for people who are, sharing across one device.
Yeah, absolutely. So often my recommendation would be to try and set up, even if it's the same device, trying to set up as much segmentation as possible. So whether it's having different logins, I remember when we used to have the family computer, everyone would have a different sort of profile on the computer and they would log into that. So whether it's something like that, or whether it's a shared network where we've got different folders, I think those are really good ways to do it. Or if you're using something like a Google Drive or something like that, just giving people different drives and different accounts, so that, you know, even though you're sharing a computer, you log into your Google Drive for your documents. And so whilst it's not, ideally you would have the different kind of accounts, the different profiles on the computer. If you can't do that for some reason, then at least trying to separate out your folders or whatever it is as best you can.
Great, thank you.
I have a question for you, Lachlan. First off, thanks so much for that presentation. It's really good to have someone who's a proper cybersecurity expert come and give us this. Particularly liked your invention of the meme. What was it? Have a think before you click a link, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
That
We'll go back to the recording, because I got to copyright that one.
No, that was good. That was good. My question was just if you have a recommendation for a password manager. You've talked about a password manager a couple of times. I don't know, maybe you're not allowed to for liability reasons, but if you have a recommendation for one that people can use.
No, happy to discuss it. So I use 1Password. That's what I use myself. I know LastPass is another one that's out there, but my recommendation would just be to go onto your search engine, search password managers, and have a look around to find one that suits you. Also, a lot of organizations offer them. Because you can get them commercially. So I know lots of organizations you can kind of sign up through your company or your organization and get an account.
Oh, my other question is one that I don't know how the biometrics on the phone, when you have the it's facial recognition stuff, how that works, and whether that's how secure that is versus having a long pin or something like that.
So the biometrics obviously depends on who's doing it. So a lot of organizations have kind of outsourced, at a technical level, outsourced that to either Apple or Samsung, who have developed really good systems. So I know a little bit more about the Apple one because I use Apple, but they have a number of indicators of life, is what they call it. So often, if I go onto my Microsoft Authenticate app, it'll actually scan very quickly, like microseconds apart, scan my face multiple times to make sure that it's not the exact same, because if it's a photo, then it's going to be the exact same. If it's me holding up my phone, there's going to be, marginal, tiny, imperceptible changes. And so it's not only ensuring that you are, or what it's seeing is you, but also that it is you in front of the device and that you're alive. So that having come from, I remember when we used to have thumbprints on the phone, a lot more advanced than that. So it's quite good as well, because it means that these really sophisticated advanced service providers like Apple and Samsung and that sort of thing are now investing huge amounts of effort and resources into producing this really good technology that is then shared across all of your accounts, rather than everyone having to do it themselves.
No, good to know. Yeah, cool. And then the last one from me is a similar sort of biometric thing. When I was living in Australia, it was a little while ago now, but the ATO was using a voice recognition thing as part of their security checks when you'd call up. A few months ago, I used AI to make like a podcast using my voice that I didn't actually speak, and it took like 30 seconds to learn my voice. Are those outdated and unusable now, no longer secure?
Yeah, so increasingly vulnerable, but when it comes to cybersecurity, we're always just talking about kind of risk thresholds. So, for example, at my house, if the Ocean's 11, team wanted to get into my house, they probably can. Like, if somebody really desperately wants to get into my house, whether it's the police or the fire department or some like super criminals, they can do it, and that's just a risk that I live with. Same here. What we do and that's why I said with multi-factor authentication, it's 99% of the time. But there are always going to be really capable actors who are going to be able to get what they want because they've just got the resources and the expertise and the time. What we want to do is increase the burden and increase the threshold. So it's not just some random person who, as I was saying with the example earlier, going and buying some credentials and then sending some emails. Like, if you want to get into my system, you better be really good and you better be willing to put in the effort, because, unfortunately at the moment, it's not about being the best in the world. It's about being, the second slowest antelope in the jungle or whatever, because the attackers, again, they're there to make money. They're there to do it quick. So they're going to, if they can't get into your systems, they're going to move on to someone else. So I think we're just about done with time, but if anyone has, similar to Dio in the chat, if anyone wants to talk further or you have any other questions or anything like that, just reach out to Safia and she'll put you in touch with me. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Lachlan. So we have amazing takeaways today, and I guess we will see everyone in June now for the next webinar. And please check out our YouTube page, and if you have any questions, contact us on BS website as well. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good time.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.